Hello, I'm Noel. My guest tonight advocates both rational passion and passionate reason. It's a mistake, he says, to see reason and passion in opposition. The resolution of this apparent paradox is embodied in what we might call his creed, objectivism. This was articulated for him by the mid-20th century American writer Ayn Rand, whom he called an epoch-making giant. To bring all those threads together, I'm pleased to welcome to Triangle Television the New Zealand founder of libertarianism, Lindsay Perigo. Welcome, Lindsay.
Thank you very
Welcome
much.
to Triangle Television. Why was Ayn Rand so important that we should take notice of her?
I think you'd better take notice of her because the whole world is at the moment. I see you've got a
The book,
copy
yeah,
of
we'll wave that in a moment.
Atlas Shrugged sitting there.
Yeah.
You know that's hitting the bestseller lists again all these years
Yeah,
after
it's what, 50
Ayn
years
Rand's
older.
death
Yeah.
and all these years after publication.
Yes.
It came out in 1958, so that's 51 years on.
Yes.
And the reason for that has to be word of mouth and the fact that people are somehow aware that this book is the solution and the explanation for the current crisis that we're in.
So how we got here and what we got to do about it, it's all in there.
It's there, but it's fiction.
Yes.
I
Yes.
mean,
Yeah.
it's fiction,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's non-fiction
Yeah.
in the sense that it's prophetic. If you
Yeah.
dip into those
Yeah.
pages, and I'm
Okay.
sure you have,
It's a bit,
you'll think, my God,
Yeah.
how did she know?
It's very long. Yeah, but the book has been both celebrated and deplored, so
yes.
it's a very polarising book.
Yes, nothing wrong with that.
No.
I think obviously anyone who comes with a clear message is going to be polarising. I know it's very fashionable nowadays not to have a clear message at all.
Yeah.
The idea is not to cause offence to
Yeah,
anyone.
yeah.
So you fudge everything. Weasel words, as I call it.
Yes.
The world is perishing from an orgy of weasel
Well,
words.
okay.
You never got weasel words from Ayn Rand. You knew exactly where she stood.
Yeah. If I,
And she alienated conservatives
Yeah.
and liberals because of her atheism. The liberals didn't mind that so much, but the conservatives certainly did. She said the traditional conservative defence of capitalism just doesn't stack up. In fact, it concedes the opponent's ground to the opponents.
Yeah.
And she gave it a different secular underpinning. And that's why, to come to your question, why is she so important? If capitalism is to have a future, then we must discover and apply that underpinning.
It's a
she
sort of
provided,
purification.
based on secular reason,
Yes.
not on
No.
a non-existent God.
well, because there's a lot of other people beating the atheist drum these days, Dawkins and Hitchens and so on.
I
So
know.
there's a lot of, it's much more fashionable nowadays than it used to be.
Sort of, but you see, it's an atheism in their case that doesn't go anywhere. I mean, imagine writing a whole book about why there is no God. What a waste of time. Because the onus of proof,
Yes.
Dawkins,
But she's saying-
clever that he is, doesn't realise
Yes.
this. You don't have to write a whole book
Yeah.
saying the probability of God is 5% or minus 5 or
Yeah.
whatever he comes
Yeah.
up with.
Yeah.
The onus of proof is on he who says there is a God. Okay, fine,
Yeah.
prove it.
Yeah.
But until that time, I won't believe it.
We'll try and bring the God thing back in a moment, because as I see, the theme of the book is that the people who carry the world ought to go on strike. Is that why Atlas Shrugged? Is that what that's pointing to?
If they're being exploited, they should go on strike. That's what they do in Atlas Shrugged. They are the ones on whom everything is blamed.
She talks about looters and smoochers.
Smoochers are the people, the parasites who do nothing,
Yes.
but expect to be delivered everything
Yes.
at the expense of those who do the producing.
Are these smoochers? Are these any social welfare
Moochers.
recipients? Oh, sorry.
Moochers and looters.
Oh, okay. Well, I got my yes on the wrong.
Well, smoochers is close
Well,
enough.
wait a- okay.
But it-
The
it's
moochers-
a slightly different connotation, which I don't think she intended.
No, not in this case. No. But so the moochers are the people who are parasitic on the productive and creative people. So would you put all social welfare recipients, all pension recipients in that category?
Oh, well, no, certainly not pension recipients because they're simply claiming back what they've been putting in over a lifetime. I would prefer the government didn't do it. In fact, Ayn Rand would forbid the government from doing it because she said the government really is restricted to law courts and defence and the upholding of contracts, law and order and defence. So things like charity, welfare, etc., are all in the voluntary part of life, which of course is the whole point of the exercise and the whole reason you have government. Every human interaction, adult at least, should be voluntary, and it's to protect the right to voluntary interaction, which means autonomy over your own life. That is why we have government, not to dish out money here and there to anyone who
So the
demands it.
looters are the governments who take tax. All taxation is theft. Someone else said that. But is that the general trend?
Compulsory taxation is theft. I should say, I mean, you'll then say to me, well, how do you finance government? And, that's ridiculous if you're going to say that it can be funded out of voluntary taxation because no one will pay it. Ayn Rand was always at pains to say, look, that's the very last reform that we implement when the whole culture has changed, so that people don't see government as the enemy, don't see the taxman as the enemy, but realise why they need a government and that will then contribute to it as they take out insurance.
So her central theme was objectivism. What's that in a couple of sentences?
Well, take your cue from the word objectivism. It aims for objectivity, and what it says basically is that man's distinctive faculty, not his only faculty, but his distinctive faculty is reason. And the job of reason is to identify reality and draw conclusions about it so that man can live. Life is the standard of value. Reason is man's tool of survival. And so obviously the process of ascertaining, identifying reality must be objective if you're going to get it right. But if it's not objective, you'll get it wrong.
But you'd see one of the counters to rationality would be religion in the terms you've described. But there must be other counters. There must be other... I'm saying the blind consumerism that we're all wrapped up in nowadays, that is a quasi-religion, isn't it? And that's really not very clever at all.
Well, it may not be, but you see, you're at liberty to argue against it and not participate in it. So if you don't like consumerism, if you don't like consumer goods, get off the chair you're sitting on and sit on the floor. Lie on a bed of nails.
Right.
But who's going to make that for you? I mean, consumerism is good. And this sort of stuff about blind consumerism, it's part of the left wing's campaign against capitalism. You're sounding like Barack Obama.
Well, I've got to have a count.
With all due respect, you're not nearly as bad. I know you've got questions about.
No, we're going to do a little segue here because people will recognise you as a broadcaster from way back. You had a career in broadcasting. You were in radio in the 70s. You were in TV from the mid 80s to early 90s. But then you left TV and you flung back to them the challenge that television was brain dead, and I think a lot of people applauded.
Oh yes, it went on for weeks. I had no idea it would cause such a furore. I thought it would be a quiet little piece on Barry Shaw's television page in the New Zealand Herald. But when I opened the paper the next morning, it was front page headlines, cartoons, the works. So obviously it struck a chord.
So what was your grounds for then saying that it was brain dead?
What I could see was happening was a person who shall remain nameless, one of the TVNZ executives, had announced to anyone who cared to listen that the day of the studio interview was over. The studio interview was dead.
Here we are.
Excuse us.
Here we are.
Well, we're both corpses, of course. And they were downplaying and relegating to late times at night, late time slots, those programs in which there were head-to-head studio interviews.
What was he putting in a preference to?
Well, nothing. Just film items and razzmatazz.
Dancing,
all that. Well, we didn't have that. And mind you, I love that program. So, there's a place for all of that. But what I was talking about specifically was news and current affairs.
Yes.
And when your boss is saying that the day of the studio interview is over, then you realise when you're a studio interviewer, and that's your main claim to fame, this place is not long for you, and you are not long for this place. That was about a year before I flounced, I suppose. So I went through a lot of soul searching because, it was an awfully attractive job to have and well paying.
But the day of the long interview, we're doing a 27-minute interview.
That still hasn't come back.
Hasn't come back.
No.
And there seems, our own feeling, our own experiences, there is a place for it. It may not be a mainstream television top of the pops thing, but there is a constituency out there for it.
I'm sure there is, and I'm sure it's big enough, more than big enough, to be mainstream. It may appeal mainly to old farts like us, but there are a lot of us. Let's say we're talking the 45 to 105 age group, and they've got enough money spread out among them to be an audience worth cultivating. But the emphasis, for whatever reason, is solely on gum-chewing teenagers.